You probably noticed on the outside of the diagram are two questions. How do I know what I know? And how can I apply my knowledge? So these are here because in every single aspect of the curriculum, in all the material that students will be presented with, students will constantly be asked to apply their knowledge to these questions. So I'm going to give a few examples of how this comes out in the curriculum. For example, in math, students won't be just asked to accept a certain law in mathematics, like Pythagorean theorem or something, or all different laws of mathematics. They will be asked they would be asked the question, how do you know that that's true? Because one of the problems in education in Africa and in other places of the world too is that their brains are programmed to just accept what is told, and what happens is that we don't have as many of the Einsteins and the Newtons and the Galileos that we could have, because education is causing this memorization, regurgitate sort of approach to learning. So in every single law of mathematics presented, students would have to discover it themselves through the guidance of the teacher. And how can I apply my knowledge? How can I apply mathematical knowledge? And this is, really direct applications. Like, how can I use what I know about volume and mass to create a better water system or a better water well in my community? And students would be asked to reflect on these sort of things. And I just want to point out, with these questions, teachers aren't going to be, telling students, this is how what you're learning right now in mathematics connects to the second question. No, students will always be asked to give their own ideas, and there's no wrong answer. This is room for students to be independent and think for themselves. That's the whole point of the exercise, is to get students to become more innovative and think for themselves, think outside the box, not just being asking for confirmation from the teacher. And of course, the value is that students will learn how to take what they learn in school and actually use it to do what they want to do, which is they see abject poverty around them every day, and they just want to make a change in their community and their nation. For example, in social studies, how do I know what I know? Students will always be questioning what's the other side of the story, and they'll be taught to look at multiple perspectives before they are allowed to gain a piece of knowledge or to accept something as true. How can I apply my knowledge? Students will actually have assignments where in social studies they have to take what they learned about, doing surveys in the community, or evaluating the needs of a community, or evaluating the human rights issues in an area. Students will have to go out. Students will constantly be out, making a difference in their communities. And not only will that help the whole area where they live, not only the students, but also once students leave school, they'll have all these skills. They've already done all these leadership sorts of things that, in the West, we see that as extracurricular activities or extra bonus points that help your resume or something. But students will actually have all this background. Is that one of the major flaws in education around the world today is that any kind of measurement of what somebody does, of what a student does, comes out in a grade, a good or bad grade. And if the student didn't get it right the first time, it's a punishment, it's a bad grade. But at Pangea schools, it would be more about evaluating what somebody does, literally does, not just what they write on a test. Not everybody's a test taker, and something has to change in the way that students are being, tested for their knowledge. Knowledge to be tested as to how we apply it, not just how we write it down or how well we memorize it. Okay, so in the field of historical studies, an example of how do I know what I know, this plays a big role in historical studies because we can't just look at a textbook and say, oh, that's the fact about history. No, that's somebody's interpretation. That's an angle of whoever wrote the textbook. So students will be looking at how do I know what I know based on the bias of this text, because they will be taught that every single text is biased, in at least to some degree. So, and how can I apply my knowledge? In historical studies, students will reflect on, for example, how can I use the lessons in history to and apply to what's going on in today's world? How does current events today connect to what happened in the past? And what are the historical roots? And how can I use knowledge of those historical roots in order to come up with a more long-term solution? In science, how do I know what I know is going to work similar to math. Students won't be asked to just accept a law of physics or a law of chemistry. They'll actually figure it out for themselves. And for how can I apply my knowledge, just like social studies, students are dying to actually use the field to make change in their communities, their nations, and in the world. So the possibilities are endless. Green technology, advancements in medicine. So many students, I asked my students when I taught in Malawi, what do you want to be when you grow up? I don't know how many students said, I want to become a scientist so I can find the cure for AIDS. Most of these children have family members who have passed from AIDS. So those are just a couple of examples of endless possibilities of applying knowledge of science to changing the world. For technology and engineering, green tech is also one. Renewable energy, that's how we can apply our knowledge. And for how do I know what I know? How do you define green? How do you define sustainable? What are the criteria? People throw the words around every day, but do we have a clear definition for, what is a green power source? What is a green, building? And in the different language fields, how do I know what I know? This comes into play a lot because the way we use language affects the way that we gain knowledge. How can I apply my knowledge? Looking at novels that have changed the world, fiction and nonfiction books that have changed the world, how can I write a book that will cause somebody to change the way they think? That's how these questions would be applied. Just some examples of how these questions would apply throughout the curriculum. And again, students would be making these connections on their own. And I think this is really the beauty and the uniqueness of the Pangea schools, what the Pangea schools curriculum will be.